still remember the way the mountains looked that night. A black outline against a bruised sky, their peaks swallowed in fog, as though the earth itself wanted to keep its secrets. My cabin sat deep in the pines, where the nearest town was a fading glow 2 hours down a winding road. The silence there was thick, so quiet I could hear the hum of the lantern, and the faint rustle of snow against the wooden walls. It was supposed to be peaceful, a place to rest, to breathe, to be away from everything. But peace has a way of turning on you, especially when the shadows don't behave the way they should. I began noticing things out of the corner of my ojar pale hand in the window reflection. A whisper slipping through the cracks when the wind had died. The sound of boots crunching on snow, though I was alone. Sometimes it was nothing more than a shape standing between the trees, waiting. Other times it felt as though something had already stepped inside with me. I tried to tell myself it was just the mountain air, the isolation playing tricks on me. But I know what I saw, what I heard, and what followed me in those nights by the cabin fire. That's when I realized the mountain was never empty. That's when I saw it. The storm had passed, but it left the mountain silent. Too silent. The pines dripped with melted snow, each drop echoing in the stillness. The fog clung low to the ground, folding between the trees like pale smoke that refused to rise. I stepped outside the cabin, lantern in hand. The air was damp, heavy. My boots sank into the softened earth, and each step felt muffled. The world had gone hushed. For a long while I stood on the porch, listening. The forest always had its own rhythm and owl, the creak of branches, the faint breath of wind. But that night, nothing stirred. The silence pressed against me until my chest felt tight, and then I saw it, not far ahead, between the trees. A faint glow flickered. A lantern. Its light swayed gently, as if carried by a hand. Warm, golden. Out of place in the cold grey, I thought maybe someone was lost. A traveller, a hiker caught in the storm. The mountain claimed people sometimes. But maybe, just maybe, this was someone who needed help. I stepped down from the porch, drawn toward it. The fog thickened around my legs, clinging like wet cloth. Branches reached out, brushing against my coat. Every few steps, I looked up. The light was still there, but it never came closer. Always the same distance, always swaying just ahead. I walked faster, heart steady, breath fogging the cold air. The ground grew softer, patches of snow clinging in shadows. I could hear the faint drip of water from the treetops, a rhythm that only made the silence deeper. The lantern glowed through it all, like a promise. But when I stopped, so did it. When I held my breath, the swaying slowed, as if waiting for me. I whispered into the fog, my voice trembling in the still air. Hello. No answer. Only that soft golden flicker further between the trees. Curiosity pulled me forward again. The deeper I went, the more the mountain felt strange. The air carried a hum I couldn't place, like the faint vibration of wires overhead, though I knew no wires reached this far. My skin prickled as if watched, though the forest seemed empty. The light guided me down a slope. Roots snaked across the ground, slick with frost. I stumbled, catching myself against a pine, my lantern nearly slipping from my hand. When I lifted my head, the glow was farther now. Much farther. It should have been impossible. No one could move that fast. But there it was, pulsing faintly through the fog, calling me deeper. Something in me shifted. Curiosity bent into unease. It didn't feel like someone lost anymore. It felt like something waiting. Still, I walked on. The fog grew thicker until the trees themselves blurred into shapes. Every direction looked the same. Every path curved into pale grey. And yet the lantern remained. At times it dimmed to almost nothing, as if the fog wanted to swallow it whole. Other times it flared brighter, a heartbeat of light, tugging me closer. I began to notice other things, too. Shadows moving just beyond sight. The faint crunch of footsteps behind me, stopping when I turned. The way the trees seemed to lean, as though listening. My breath grew sharp, echoing in the hush. I whispered again, softer this time. "Who's there?" The lantern swung once, left to right, slow, deliberate, and then it stilled. My hand tightened on the handle of my own lantern. Its flame trembled, though no wind stirred. The fog pressed heavier, the air damp against my skin. I felt the mountain breathing around me. I took one last step forward. The ground gave slightly, softer than before. When I looked down, the earth was almost black. I froze. The lantern ahead flared brighter, then faded, retreating deeper into the fog. And something inside me understood. It was leading me, but not home. The silence was unbearable now. Not a bird, not a branch, only my own heartbeat and the dim glow ahead. I thought of turning back, but when I turned, the fog had folded in behind me. The cabin was gone, the path erased. All that remained was the pale, swaying glow. I stood there for a long time, the damp air clinging to my lungs, the hum of the mountain in my ears. I didn't follow, not that night. I let the lantern fade, swallowed by the mist, until nothing remained but silence. And yet, I knew it hadn't gone. It was waiting for the next storm. For the next night, I dared to look too long into the fog. Even now, when the air grows heavy and the pines hold their breath, I still see it, that pale glow swaying between the trees, always just out of reach. Nights in the cabin were meant to be quiet, the kind of quiet that settles deep in your bones. The pines outside bent under the weight of snow. The wind pressed against the walls, but inside, everything felt still. The fire had burned low, its glow fading into embers. I lay on the narrow bed, watching shadows shift along the ceiling. The wood creaked softly, stretching as the temperature dropped. It was nothing unusual. Cabins breathe at night. But then the creaks changed. They weren't random anymore. They fell into a rhythm. One step, then another, slow. Measured, the sound came from beneath the floor. I held my breath, straining to listen. The steps paused, then continued, back and forth, as though someone was pacing directly under me. My hand gripped the blanket tighter. The fire cracked faintly, but it did nothing to fill the silence. I sat up, staring at the wood planks beneath my feet. They were still, unmoving. And yet, I could hear it, the faint shuffle of footsteps, a shift of weight, the quiet groan of old wood bending. The cabin had no cellar, at least not one I'd ever been told about. But the sound was too clear, too real. Someone was down there. For hours, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was the storm, the wind pressing through cracks, the logs shifting in the frost. But deep down, I knew. This was different. By morning, the sound was gone. The floor silent again. But I couldn't shake the unease. When the sun rose higher, I searched. Every corner, every wall, every seam between the planks, and then I found it, near the hearth, where the floor darkened with soot. A square outline marked the wood, a hatch, barely visible, its edges sealed with rusted nails driven deep. My chest tightened as I crouched over it. The air felt colder here, as if something seeped from below. I pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing, only silence, still. The memory of footsteps lingered. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep unless I looked. It took hours to pry the nails loose. The metal groaned, flakes of rust scattering across the boards. Each nail pulled free with a sharp, brittle cry, as though the cabin itself resisted. Finally, the hatch lifted with a dry sigh of wood against wood. A breath of stale air rose up, cold and damp. It smelled of earth, old stone, and something faintly metallic. I held my lantern close, its light trembling as I peered down. A narrow space stretched beneath, too small to be called a cellar, more like a crawl space. The dirt floor was uneven, carved out by hands long before mine. At first it was empty, just soil, rocks, shadows. The lantern's glow shivered across the walls as I reached for the handle. But before I touched it, I felt it. The floor shifted beneath my feet. Not the way old boards bend under weight, this was different. It pulsed, a slow, steady rhythm, as though the cabin itself had a heartbeat. I backed away, pressing my spine against the wall. My breath echoed too loudly in the silence, and in the corner of my eye, something moved. The rocking chair swayed forward, once, then back again, soft, measured. I froze, watching as the chair rocked on its own, the wood groaning with each slow movement. No wind stirred, no hand pushed it, and then it stopped, perfectly still. I couldn't take it any more. I grabbed the door and pulled it open. Cold air rushed in, biting at my skin. The forest outside waited, grey and silent. I didn't look back as I stepped onto the porch. Didn't glance at the windows, though I felt eyes on me from within. The trail was still there, though the fog seemed thicker now, folding around the trees, muffling the world. I walked quickly, boots sinking into soft earth, the weight of the cabin pressing behind me. Even as I climbed the slope and the forest swallowed it from view, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I turned back, I would see smoke still curling from the chimney, the rocking chair swaying in the silence, and a figure standing at the window, in a cabin that was not mine, but knew me all the same. Approximately 800 words, nights on the mountain, are long, the kind of long that settles into your chest, where silence presses against the walls until you can hear your own blood moving. To keep myself company, I keep a shortwave radio. Its hum fills the cabin, a low, static, rising and falling like breath. The pale glow of its dial is often the only light besides the lantern. I turn it slowly, chasing fragments of voices across the bands, sometimes music, sometimes nothing but the hollow buzz of empty air. That night, the snow hadn't stopped for hours. It drifted heavy against the windows, muting the world outside. The forest was gone, swallowed in white. I sat beside the stove, listening to the static, half dreaming, half waiting for sleep. Then I heard it. A voice, low, pressed thin against the static, like someone whispering through a wall of snow. It spoke my name. The sound cut through me, sharp and cold. No one should have known I was here. No one should have been able to reach me through the empty bands of radio air. I leaned closer, ear almost touching the speaker. The static swirled, and beneath it another sound emerged. Boots moving through snow, slow, measured. Crunching closer, step by step, the voice whispered again, calm, almost tender. Don't look outside. I froze. Every instinct begged me to glance at the window, but the words clung to me, heavy with warning. The boots drew nearer, crunch, crunch, each step distinct, as if right outside the cabin walls. My breath clouded in the lantern light. The air felt colder now, though the stove burned steady. The static thickened, hissing like a storm dot again. The whisper pressed through. Stay where you are. My hand hovered above the lantern, trembling. The shadows shifted across the floorboards. Every creak of the cabin seemed louder. I told myself not to move, not to look, but the silence beyond the static was unbearable. Slowly, against everything in me, I turned toward the window. The snow pressed thick against the glass, a pale sheet. At first, nothing stirred. No movement, only white. Then, a shape, a dark outline, faint, blurred by frost. Too tall, too still. Its head tilted, as though listening. The crunching stopped. My breath caught in my throat. The figure didn't move closer, yet the glass fogged, as if someone's breath pressed against it from the other side. I staggered back, knocking the chair into the table. The radio crackled violently, static rising like a scream. Through it, the voice whispered once more, "You shouldn't have looked." The shape faded into the snow, gone as though it had never been. But the fog remained on the glass, slow to fade. The radio quieted, slipping back into empty static. The boots no longer crunched. The silence returned, heavier than before. I sat in the corner until the lantern burned low, too afraid to move, too afraid to turn the radio dial again. Even now, sometimes, when the storm thickens and the nights feel endless, I swear I hear it. The soft hum of the radio, the faint whisper of my name, and footsteps pacing slowly, just beyond the snow. Approximately 850 words the storm had passed by dawn. The forest was still, the kind of silence that feels too heavy, as if the world is holding its breath. I stepped out onto the porch. Snow stretched in every direction, smooth, untouched, a clean white sheet laid across the mountain. For a moment, it felt comforting. The trees were bowed low under the weight, their branches frozen in place. Not even a bird stirred, just endless white. That's when I noticed them, a single trail of prints. Bare feet, each step pressed deep into the snow. Too clear to be old, too sharp to have drifted. They led straight from the tree line to my cabin door. No hesitation, no wandering path, just a direct line. I stood frozen, staring at them. The prints stopped at the edge of the porch, right where I was standing, but there was no return path. Whoever had walked there had not left. My chest tightened. I glanced back at the door. It had been locked all night. I would have heard it open. The air felt sharper now. Each breath caught in my throat like broken glass. The prince stared up at me, patient and cold. I knelt beside one. The shape was unmistakable. 5 toes, the curve of a heel. Naked flesh pressed into snow, but the size unsettled me most. Too long, stretched in a way that wasn't quite right. I pulled back quickly, brushing the frost from my gloves. The wind moved faintly through the trees. The rest of the snow remained smooth, Only those prints disturbed it. All day I kept glancing out the window. Each time they were there, a trail of silent proof leading straight to me. As the sun began to sink, the prints seemed darker against the fading snow. Shadows filled them like empty wells. I couldn't shake the thought that something was still standing just beyond the trees, waiting. Night came slow. The cabin walls creaked in the cold. I set the lantern low, its glow trembling across the floorboards. But the silence outside grew heavier. Every so often I thought I heard a faint shift in the snow, a weight settling, a rustle like breath against ice. But when I looked through the window, the prints never changed. No new steps, no movement, only that same line stopping at my door. The unease built until I couldn't bear it. I opened the door once more, letting the cold rush in. The night was pale, the sky bruised with faint stars. The prints were still there, but they looked different now, deeper, as though something had pressed into them again. More recently, I followed them with my eyes to the tree line. The forest stood dark and endless. The fog of my breath drifted into the still air. Something about the silence felt wrong. It wasn't empty. It was watching. I stepped back inside and bolted the door. The lantern flickered as if in warning. I couldn't look at the windows anymore. Hours passed. The stove cracked softly. I tried to sleep, but each time my eyes closed, I saw the prints again, fresh, leading to me. Sometime near dawn, half dreaming, I heard it. A single sound, the faintest tap on the porch, as if a bare foot had pressed lightly against the wood. I held my breath. The cabin didn't stir, but the silence that followed was colder than any storm. When morning came, I forced myself to look. The trail of prints remained in the snow, still stopping at my door, still waiting, but now one more had appeared, pressed into the frost of the porch itself. Closer, so much closer, and still no return path. Approximately 900 words, the mountain was still that night. No wind through the trees, no crack of branches, just a silence so deep it pressed against my ears. I sat by the lantern, staring at the shadows stretching long across the floor. The flame flickered, though the air didn't move. My own breath seemed loud, filling the quiet with pale clouds. That's when I heard it. A soft groan. Not from the stove, not from the rafters. It came from the walls themselves. At first, I thought the logs were settling, creaking from the cold. But then the sound grew steady, slow, rhythmic, like something drawing in breath. The cabin was breathing. I pressed my hand against the wall. The wood shifted under my palm, faint but alive, expanding, then falling back. The rhythm of lungs. I froze. Every instinct begged me to pull away, but the steady rise and fall held me there, as though the logs were pulling me closer. I leaned in, pressing my ear against the wood. At first I heard nothing but the thrum of my own heart, then something deeper, a slow, deliberate beat, a heartbeat. Inside the wall, I staggered back, knocking the chair against the floor. The lantern wavered, shadows splitting across the ceiling. The walls groaned again, exhaling into the stillness. I told myself it wasn't possible, that it had to be the cold, the ice pressing into the logs. But the sound continued steady, patient, alive. The air grew heavier, like the cabin itself was pulling it in, holding it, releasing it again. Each breath seemed to match my own until I couldn't tell if I was breathing or if it was breathing for me. I walked from wall to wall, pressing my ear to the wood. Each one pulsed faintly beneath the frost. Each one carried that same low beat, as if veins ran through the cabin, carrying something unseen. At the far corner, the sound grew louder. The heartbeat echoed slow, dragging, as though something enormous lay just behind the wood, waiting. I whispered into the silence, though I don't know why. The words slipped from me before I could stop them. "What do you want?" The cabin answered with a deep groan, timbers flexing like lungs straining for air. The lantern dimmed, flame shrinking as though smothered. I backed toward the door, hand trembling on the latch, but I didn't open it. Something in me knew. It was worse outside, that if the mountain itself was breathing, I didn't want to hear what waited in the trees. So I sat on the floor, staring at the walls as they expanded and fell. The heartbeat grew softer, almost soothing, a lull that pressed against my thoughts until I could barely keep my eyes open. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes, hours' time drifted. The rhythm filled everything, lulling me like a tide. I almost surrendered to it, but then it stopped. The breath froze. The heartbeat silenced. The stillness returned, sudden and absolute. The cabin was just wood again, cold, silent, unmoving. I sat in the dark, too afraid to shift, waiting for it to return. But it didn't. Not that night, and yet. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel it. The subtle swell of walls around me, the faint echo of a slow heartbeat in the logs, as if the cabin is only resting, holding its breath, waiting for me to listen again. Approximately 750 words the first time. It was just 3 knocks, soft even. A rhythm against the wood of the door. I thought it was the wind, branches swaying, the mountain shifting in the night. But when I opened it, the porch was empty. The snow lay untouched. No prints, no trace of anyone standing there. I closed it slowly, bolted it again, told myself not to think about it. The next night, I heard it again, but this time it was for knocks. Sharper, louder, each one deliberate. Echoing through the silence of the cabin, my breath caught in my throat. I waited, listening. No voice followed, no footsteps retreating. When I opened the door, the night looked the same. White snow, still trees, nothing waiting for me. I left the lantern burning until dawn. Sleep never came. By the 3rd night, I was already expecting it. I sat at the table, staring at the door, waiting for the sound. And when it came, it made my skin crawl. 5 knocks. Slower now, heavier. The wood shook beneath each strike, as though something massive pressed its weight into the frame. The latch trembled in its housing. The air grew colder with each knock, until the lantern flame bent toward the door. I couldn't move. My hands clutched the table until my knuckles ached. I didn't open it this time. I couldn't. The knocks stopped. But the silence that followed was worse. It stretched long into the night, thick and endless. When morning came, I forced myself to check. The porch was empty. The snow was smooth. No one had been there. And yet, I knew it would return. The 4th night, I barely breathed. The knocks came again. 6 now. So loud the hinges groaned. I pressed my hands against my ears, but I could still feel them, each one vibrating through the walls, through the floor, through my chest. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The silence swallowed it whole. Then it stopped. The stillness returned. The lantern sputtered, and the night went on. By the fifth night, I understood. It wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. It was counting. Each knock was part of something moving closer, something patient, something waiting. I sat with my back to the door, shaking. 7 knocks. They came like a hammer, each one stronger than the last. I felt the wood bow inward with the final strike. The latch bent slightly, a faint crack echoing in the quiet, and then it ended. The cabin sank into silence again, but I couldn't stop shaking. I don't know what happens when it finishes, what waits at the end of the count. All I know is that tonight the number will rise again, and I don't think the door will hold much longer. Approximately 850 words. The pines stand silent at night, tall, black figures swaying against the pale light of the moon. Snow clings to their branches, heavy, unmoving. From my window, I can see the clearing, the tree line, the shadows they cast across the white ground. At first, they all seemed the same, dark silhouettes stretching across the snow, shifting gently as the wind moved the branches. But one of them stayed still, even when the others swayed, even when the tree itself was gone. I rubbed my eyes, stepped back from the glass, told myself it was nothing but exhaustion. Yet when I looked again, it remained, a long dark smear across the snow, lingering where no shadow should exist. The next night, I checked again. The moonlight was strong, sharp against the frozen ground. The trees shifted, branches bent, shadows danced across the clearing. But that one shape stayed, thick, still wrong. It stretched further this time, reaching closer to my cabin, a line of black across the white snow. I held my breath, watched it for hours. It never moved back, only forward. The third night, I couldn't sleep. The thought of it waiting outside gnawed at me. So I sat by the window, lantern dimmed. The forest was still, the sky pale and cloudless, the moon cold and heavy above the trees. And there it was again, the shadow, longer now, almost at the edge of the porch. It didn't flicker, didn't bend with the branches, didn't change at all. It just reached, as if the night itself was crawling toward me. I backed away from the window, but I couldn't look away. My breath fogged the glass. The lantern hummed faintly, and the shadow stayed. The fourth night, I kept the curtains closed. But I could feel it, that strange pressure in the room, the weight of something pressed against the walls. Every time the floor creaked, I froze. Every time the wood popped with the cold, I thought it had found a way inside. I couldn't sleep. By dawn, I dared to look. The clearing was quiet, the trees unchanged, but in the snow, just beyond the porch steps, there was no shadow, only a faint black stain, like frost burned deep into the white. That night, I didn't close the curtains. I wanted to see, to know how close it would come. The moon rose, the snow glittered, the pines stood still in their silence, and the shadow was waiting, no longer in the clearing, but at the base of the steps. I could see its edges, jagged and uneven, like fingers stretching upward, like something pulling itself closer. My hands trembled against the window frame. The silence was unbearable. Even the lantern seemed to hold its breath. I turned away, sat in the dark, tried not to imagine it pressing against the walls. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. I couldn't tell anymore. When I looked again, the porch was empty. But I don't believe it left. I don't believe it ever leaves. The snow still glows in the moonlight. The trees still cast their long, harmless shadows. But I know there's another one out there, waiting, stretching, moving closer. Each night it lingers longer, and soon it won't stop at the walls. The forest at night is quiet. Snow drifts between the branches. The moon lays pale light across the frozen ground. Inside the cabin, I sit by the dim lantern. The wood creaks softly with the weight of the cold. My breath drifts into the air like smoke, and then I hear it. A voice, low, broken, it carries through the trees. Thin, fragile, calling my name. At first, I thought it was memory, the mind replaying old sounds to fill the silence. But it came again, closer, clearer, shaking, like a voice on the edge of breaking. It was my own voice, repeating my name as though pleading. I froze by the door, listening, waiting for it to fade. But it didn't fade. It grew, the words tangled, as if pushed through static. Help. Me. I pressed my hand against a wooden frame. My heart was slow, heavy, each beat against my ribs like a warning. The voice begged again, softer this time, fractured. Please, let me in. I knew I was alone. I knew the door was shut, the lock firm. Yet my throat tightened at the sound. I didn't answer, didn't move. I only listened. The forest was still, but the voice wasn't. It kept speaking. Each time it sounded more like me. Not just the tone, the rhythm, the breath between the words, like someone had peeled it from inside me. Why? Won't you help me? The words shook against the door, not from hands knocking, not from footsteps pressing near, just the voice, heavy in the night air, almost inside. I pressed my ear against the wood, and I swear I felt it, the faintest vibration, as if something breathed on the other side. The words stretched, greedy, twisting into anger. Open, open, open. Each one sharper, each one louder, each one more alive. My breath grew shallow. I stepped back from the door. The lantern hummed faintly, and then silence. Complete, empty, no voice. No begging, only the creak of the cabin walls. I thought it was gone. I wanted to believe it was gone. But the silence held too long, and then, from the window, a whisper, pressed close against the glass. The same voice, my own, calling my name, soft, patient, waiting. I couldn't move. The lantern flame bent, almost still. My breath caught in my throat. The glass frosted faintly, and I thought I saw the shadow of lips, mouthing words I could no longer hear. The forest was quiet again, but I know it's out there. My voice, waiting for me to answer, and sooner or later, I think I will. Approximately 900 words. The ridge is quiet in winter. Snow pressed down against the pines. Air so still it feels like it has been waiting. Locals always warned me, never follow the abandoned trail, never pass the ridge. I told myself it was just folklore, old hunters' tales left behind with their traps. But curiosity has a way of pulling at you. That night, under a pale moon, I stepped past the ridge, onto the forgotten path. The snow here was different, thicker, untouched. My boots sank into it without resistance. No other prints, no sign of deer or fox. The trees leaned closer the farther I went, branches heavy with ice, and somewhere above a crow stirred but did not cry. The path curved like it remembered me, each step slower, each step heavier. I found the first trap half buried in frost. Iron teeth, rusted orange, spread open like a jaw that never closed. I crouched down, brushed snow from its edges. The metal was cold, but not frozen, like it had been touched recently. More appeared as I walked, traps scattered in the white, each one left waiting, though no hunter had passed here in years. The trail narrowed, as though it led me to a single point. And then I saw it. In the clearing, under branches bent low with ice, a circle had been made. Antlers, dozens of them, twisted together, arranged upright in the snow. Some pale and smooth, others cracked, still marked with dried velvet. A crown of bone encircling emptiness. I stepped closer. The air felt charged. Not wind, not storm, something humming. Low, steady, almost beneath hearing. My breath hung in the cold. I leaned forward. The antlers seemed to bend, though they didn't move. The snow inside the circle was untouched, pure, white, but to clean, as though nothing living could step there. The hum grew louder, not in my ears, in my chest, like a second heartbeat. I looked back at the trees, dark lines against the moonlight, shadows stretching too long, too close. I thought I saw a figure there, not moving, not breathing, just watching. When I blinked, it was gone, but the hum remained, pressed into my bones. The antlers seemed to tilt toward me, leaning closer, as if listening. I whispered into the night, but my own voice fell flat. The sound was swallowed before it reached the trees. I turned to leave. The trail behind me was gone, only unbroken snow. I took a step back, and the hum pulsed stronger, like something beneath the ground had shifted closer. A crow moved above again. Its wings rustled, heavy, but no cry came. I closed my eyes. The hum wrapped around me. Inside it, a shape formed, a suggestion of words not meant for me. When I opened them again, the clearing was still. Silent, the antlers stood, as before. The snow perfect. The forest holding its breath. I walked backward, never turning my back to the circle. Each step a quiet surrender. The hum followed me down the ridge, soft, fading, but never gone. By the time I reached my cabin, the air was still again. The snow calm. No trail behind me. Yet even now, when the night is heavy, I feel it return. That low hum, waiting beneath my skin. As if the forest remembers, and it wants me back. Approximately 750 words, the cabin was quiet. Snow pressed against the windows. The kind of silence that feels heavy, as though the world itself has paused. I lit the fire to break it. Dry logs crackled, sparks rising into the dark. Orange light spilled across the floor. Shadows stretched into corners. For a while, it felt safe. The hum of warmth, the rhythm of wood shifting in the flames. But then, it changed. The fire no longer moved like fire. The flames twisted in a way that seemed deliberate, almost searching. I leaned closer. Through the smoke, a shape began to gather, lines bending where no lines should be. Eyes, a mouth, a face inside the fire. I froze. The features wavered in the heat, but they were familiar. Too familiar. Someone I knew. Someone I couldn't quite place. The lips moved slowly, whispering. I held my breath, trying to catch the words. But they slipped away, like water running through my hands. The more I stared, the clearer the face became. The fire no longer random. It shaped itself around the presence. The voice grew louder, low, broken, but directed at me. Calling me closer, I whispered back without meaning to. A soft question, though I don't even remember what I asked. The flames shifted in answer, mouth opening wider, eyes pale and wet with light. Something in me panicked. I grabbed the bucket by the hearth. Water sloshed, cold against my wrist. I threw it into the fire. The wood hissed. Flames collapsed into smoke. Ash rose into the air. The cabin darkened, but the voice didn't stop. It lingered in the air, softer now, but clearer without the fire. Words I couldn't understand. Whispers winding through the smoke. Sliding between the walls, I pressed my hands to my ears. The sound slipped through anyway. Inside, beneath the breath, deeper than hearing, I stepped back from the hearth. The smoke curled upward, but instead of fading, it thickened, a shape again. Not fire this time. Shadow, the same face forming, eyes open, mouth moving. I whispered to it again, though I didn't mean to. The response came sharper, almost angry. The windows trembled. The floor creaked under me. The voice filled the cabin, yet never rose above a whisper. I shut my eyes, but the image stayed, etched behind the dark, burning where vision should be. When I opened them, the fire was gone. Only cold ash on the stone. But I knew it hadn't left. The voice was still there, waiting in the silence, breathing with me. Every time I try to sleep, I see it again. Not in flames, not in smoke, but in the spaces between. The places my eyes won't stay long. Corners, glass, reflections in dark water. The face that waits familiar, watching whispering words I am not meant to understand. The cabin is small. One room, wooden walls darkened by time. At night, the air grows heavy and the silence folds in on itself. In the far corner, there's a chair. Old, carved wood. Its paint faded into the same dull grey as the floor. A rocking chair, though I never use it. When I first arrived, it seemed harmless. A forgotten piece of furniture. But the longer I stayed, the more it seemed to wait. I kept to my bed, blankets pulled tight, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams. The chair always sat in the corner, until one night, it moved, a creak, slow and deliberate. The sound of weight shifting where none should be. The chair rocked once, then again, back and forth, wood groaning softly against the floorboards. I sat up, my chest tightening. There was nothing there, only the chair, its empty shape bending into the shadows, still rocking. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, the draft slipping through the cracks. But the windows were shut tight, frost pressed against the glass. The chair moved as though guided, slow, patient, as if something unseen had settled in, watching me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay still, eyes locked on that corner. The chair rocked until dawn. The next evening, it was quiet, perfectly still, but I could feel it waiting again, as though it remembered. That became the pattern. Some nights silence, other nights the soft creak of wood shifting, gentle as breath. I told myself to ignore it, to sleep through the sound. But then, one night, the chair had turned. I woke with a start. The blankets tangled around me, and there it was, facing the bed, its empty seat tilted in the pale light. The curved back leaning toward me as though it had been moved by careful hands. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. The chair sat there, watching. I waited until morning light. Only then did I dare move it back. I shoved it into the corner, its legs dragging against the floor. But the next night, it returned, always facing me, always patient, sometimes rocking, sometimes still, but never where I left it, never truly empty. I started whispering to it, quiet words in the dark, pleas to whatever sat there to leave me alone. The chair never answered, but the silence grew heavier, thicker, like breath caught in the air. Last night was worse. I woke to the crib again. Only this time, it wasn't rocking. It had stopped angled forward, closer to the bed. Closer to me, the room felt smaller, walls pressing in, the chair looming at the foot of my blankets, its wooden arms stretched wide. I tried not to blink, not to look away. But when my eyes slipped closed for a moment, it shifted. Not much, just enough, an inch closer, as though it waited for the dark to move. I lit the lamp beside me. The flame shook in the glass. The chair froze, silent, as if caught in the act. I stayed awake until dawn. When the sun touched the windows, the chair was back in the corner, facing away as though nothing had happened. But I know it's not empty, not truly. Even now, as I sit here writing this, I can feel its weight in the room, rocking softly, waiting for me to fall asleep. It was late winter when I finally decided to leave the cabin. The snow had softened into thin crusts of ice along the ditches. The air was sharp, the kind that dries your throat after just a breath. The moon floated high above the trees, silver, pale, indifferent. I walked down the mountain road, the one I had driven up weeks ago. It curved gently between black walls of pine, the kind of curve you remember after seeing it once. My boots crunched softly, steady, deliberate. For the first hour, I didn't think. I just let the rhythm of walking carry me forward. My breath clouded the air in front of me, then faded into the dark. But then there it was, a bend in the road, marked by a crooked wooden post with faded paint. Mile marker? I glanced at it and kept walking. Another hour passed. The forest pressed closer, the night deeper. And again mile marker for the same bend, the same leaning post. I stopped. The silence of the mountain was heavier now, like snow pressing on my chest. No wind, no owls, nothing but me. I tried to laugh at it, to tell myself I'd circled back without noticing. But the road was straight. There were no turns to lead me astray, so I walked faster. I let my boots scuff louder, trying to drown out the thought forming in my head. Hours stretched thin, unraveling, and then, the marker again. That same chipped wood, that same curve of dirt, waiting for me as if it had been there all along. My throat tightened. The sky hadn't shifted. The moon hadn't moved. I couldn't tell how much time had passed, or if any had at all. I touched the post. The wood was rough, splintered, colder than the air, like something dead that still remembered being alive. I whispered, just to hear my own voice. But the words dissolved as soon as I spoke them. They didn't echo. The night swallowed them whole. I kept walking. This time I counted my steps. I told myself that if I reached 1,000, the marker would be behind me. 100, 200, 500, my legs burned, my chest ached. At 1,000 I looked up. The bend waited for me. Mile marker 47. I don't remember falling to my knees, but I was in the dirt, my palms pressed into the frozen ground. My breath broke in short, uneven bursts. The silence bent closer, listening. I thought of the cabin, of the flickering fire, the rocking chair in the corner, the shadows in the pines. All the things I had left behind, chasing escape. Maybe the road had never been a way out. I stood again, legs trembling, and forced myself forward. Each step heavier, each breath thinner. The trees leaned closer, as though they wanted to see me fail. Their branches reached across the road like ribs, forming a cage. And still the marker, that endless, patient marker. I tried to turn back. I thought maybe the cabin was safer than this road that never ended. But when I faced the other way, it was there too, the bend, the marker. No matter which direction I chose, it waited for me. The mountain didn't want me to leave. I walked until the edges of my vision blurred, until my legs shook under the weight of exhaustion, until my breath was nothing but a shallow hiss in the cold. And then I stopped, because I finally understood the road wasn't endless. It wasn't leading anywhere. It was folding itself, bending around me, trapping me in its loop. There was no way down. The silence stretched wide, pressing in, colder than the snow. And in that silence, I felt something waiting just beyond the bend. Something that had always been there, watching, waiting, knowing I could never leave. The lake was frozen solid by the time I found it. It stretched wide between the dark shoulders of the mountain. The surface gleamed under the moon, smooth as glass, pale as bone. The air around it felt different still, heavy, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Snow lay untouched along the banks. Every step I took left deep imprints, sharp in the silence. My breath rose in clouds, drifting upward, dissolving against the stars. I should have kept walking, but something in the way the ice caught the light held me there. It almost glowed, like a mirror that remembered what it had seen. At first I thought it was just a trick of the moon, but as I moved along the shore, I noticed them, shadows beneath the surface. Long shifting shapes that slid in silence, following me step for step. I stopped. They stopped too. I moved again. They drifted under the ice, keeping pace. I told myself it had to be cracks or weeds frozen below, but the lake was too deep for that, and their movements were too smooth, too deliberate. I crouched closer, snow dampening the knees of my pants. The ice was clear enough to see down, though the depths quickly swallowed the light. And in that pale glow, the shadows pressed closer. Something brushed against the underside. A hand, pale, thin. Fingers splayed against the frozen sheet, pushing upward as if searching for air. The ice held, but I could see the faint shift of knuckles, the faint drag of skin. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the snow. My breath tore from me, sharp, uneven. The lake didn't move, but the hand stayed there, palm pressed flat, waiting. I wanted to run. Every part of me screamed to leave, but my eyes wouldn't let go of the surface. The shadows multiplied. Not one, not two. Dozens of them, sliding from the depths, drifting closer, gathering beneath me, and then more hands, pressing against the ice. Pale shapes stretching upward, distorted by the frozen barrier, each one silent, each one reaching. I thought of how cold it must be beneath, how long they must have been waiting down there. My own hands burned in the winter air, but theirs looked colder, too cold to ever be warm again. The ice groaned beneath the weight of them, a long, low hum that sank into my chest. It wasn't cracking, it was breathing. I couldn't move. I could only watch as faces began to rise, not clear, not full, just pale ovals pressed against the frost, eyes like hollow smudges, mouths opening and closing, though no sound reached me. I dropped to the snow, pressing my palms to my ears, but I still felt them, the words I couldn't hear, the voices that never reached the air, crawling through the ice into my bones. I whispered back without meaning to, nonsense words, fragments, anything to fill the silence. But the faces stayed, waiting. The ice shifted again. A slow crack spread outward, not breaking, just splitting enough to show the depth. Enough to remind me that if it opened, there would be no bottom. I stumbled back, heart hammering, legs weak. The shadows pressed harder from below, the pale hands dragging down the surface, following my retreat. And yet the ice never broke. It only held them, trapping them inches away. I don't remember how long I stood there, only that when I finally turned away, the snow behind me carried a trail of uneven steps, and the lake remained silent. But even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel that cold press against my skin, as if something is still reaching, as if the ice between us was never really there. The cabin was quiet. Deep winter. Snow pressed against the walls, sealing me inside. The air smelled of pine smoke and old wood. There was only one floor. A single room stretched under the beams, heavy with their weight. I knew every corner, every shadow. There was nowhere else for anything to hide. That's why the sound unsettled me. A faint creak above me, where there shouldn't have been anything at all. I froze. Blanket pulled to my chest, breath shallow. The noise came again, slow, dragging steps across the ceiling. The cabin had no stairs, no attic, just rafters I could almost touch when I stood on the bed. But something was moving above them. Dust loosened, drifting down in pale strands. Tiny flecks landing on my pillow. The steps paused. Directly overhead, the wood groaned, long and low. I counted the seconds in silence. 1, 2, 3. Nothing until the weight shifted again. Back and forth. Measured, patient, as though someone paced. Watching, but I couldn't look up. If I looked, I thought I'd see it. Not a shadow, not a figure, but something pressed flat against the beams, staring down. The air thickened. Every breath rasped in my throat. I whispered into the dark, asking who was there. The steps stopped. The stillness felt deliberate, listening, waiting for me to speak again. I swallowed the words instead. My lantern sat cold on the table. I reached for it slowly, fingers trembling on the handle. The flame stuttered to life, glass glowing pale gold. And that's when the weight shifted again. Directly above, I saw dust raining in a steady line. The boards bowed ever so slightly, as though pressed by a heavy hand. And then silence. I thought the roof might split open, that something would peel down and step into the room. But nothing came. only the faint tremor of wood. Holding eyes stood under the beams, lantern shaking in my grip. There was nothing there, just the low ceiling, the empty rafters. Still, I could feel it, watching, listening, pressing down from a space that shouldn't exist. A second floor that was never built. I didn't sleep that night. I barely blinked. Every time my eyes closed, the boards whispered back to life. Steps circling above me, never stopping. Morning brought silence. Light filled the cabin, warming the frostbitten glass. But dust still lined my blanket, and the beams above bore fresh cracks. The cabin has no upstairs, but something walks there anyway, and every night since, it waits for me to listen. The forest was quiet that morning. Pale frost clung to the needles. My breath hung in the air, slow and clouded. The path stretched ahead, familiar as my own skin. I had walked it so many times. Every turn, every route I had tripped over. It felt impossible to lose, but something shifted that day. Behind me, the prints I left in the dirt softened, edges dissolving as though erased by an unseen hand. By the time I turned back, they were gone. I told myself the frost was melting, that the ground was swallowing them up, but the silence felt wrong. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. I pressed forward. The trail curved, bending between tall pines, bark dark with old rain. I followed it without questioning. I reached the clearing, an open circle, grass brittle and pale under the cold. I had been here before, but not from this direction. I turned, chose a new path. The forest should have led me toward the creek. Instead, the same clearing opened again before me. I tried not to panic. My chest rose too quickly, breath sharp. I pressed my hand to the nearest tree, grounding myself. The bark was warm, as if it had been touched just before me. Step after step, I searched for a way out. North, south, west. Every turn, every trail ended the same. The clearing waited, patient and wide. I knelt in the grass, pressed my palm against the soil. No tracks. Not mine, not anyone's. It was as though no one had ever walked here, as though the forest itself refused to hold memory. The silence deepened. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I called out. My voice cracked between the trees. It went nowhere. Not even an echo returned. I began to run. Branches clawed at my coat. Needles brushed across my face. But every frantic turn led back again. The clearing never changed. Not the stones at its edge. Not the crooked stump at its center. Even the clouds above seemed fixed in place. Exhaustion set in. My legs buckled. I sat in the frozen grass, clutching my knees. And for a moment, I thought I heard breathing. Not mine, slow, shallow, just behind me. But when I turned, the clearing was empty. I closed my eyes, listened. The breath was gone. Only silence pressed against me, heavy and unbroken. When I opened them again, the trees had shifted. Closer, the ring of pines drawing tight. The clearing shrinking around me. I didn't move. I couldn't. The stillness was complete now. Even the wind refused to stir. The forest had taken back its paths, erased every way forward, every way behind, and left me in the heart of nothing, listening to the silence close in. The mornings were always still, mist curling low across the trees, frost threading silver through the grass. And there, at the edge of the woods, sat the chair, old wood, weathered grey, a single backrest slat broken, facing my cabin, always facing me the first day. I thought nothing of it, just an old seat left behind by hunters, or some forgotten thing dragged from the forest. But something about its placement unsettled me. It wasn't turned toward the trees, not abandoned and forgotten. It was looking at me. At the cabin, the second morning, it was closer. Not by much, but enough that I knew it had moved. I told myself it must have been an animal, or a trick of the light. But the soil beneath its legs was undisturbed, not dragged, not pushed. Each day after, it crept nearer, always in silence, always waiting at dawn. Each morning I opened the door, and there it was. At first I tried to ignore it, closing the curtains, keeping busy with the fire, the stove, the little routines. But the weight of it pressed through the walls. I could feel it even when I didn't look, like the chair wasn't empty, like something unseen lingered in it, patient. Watching by the fourth night, I struggled to sleep. Every creak of the beams set my heart racing. Every shift of the wind stirred my breath. I refused to check the window, but the fifth morning it was worse. The chair sat halfway across the clearing now, closer than I had ever allowed anyone to come, its backrest casting a long shadow in the pale light. I thought about moving it, carrying it deep into the trees, breaking it apart, burning it. But some part of me feared touching it. Asterisk. As if the moment I laid hands on it, whatever sat in it would notice me, truly notice me, and never look away. By the seventh day, it was nearly at the porch. My throat dried when I saw it. Wood grain cracked, darkened by frost. Arms wide, waiting. That night, I barred the door, pulled every lock tight. Sat in the silence, fire burned low, but I couldn't escape the thought of it. Inches from me. I imagined footsteps in the grass, slow, careful, but when I listened, nothing moved. Only my breath filled the cabin. At some point I must have drifted, eyes heavy, head slumped against the chair by the fire, until a faint sound woke me. A soft scrape, wood against wood, from the door. I froze. The locks held. The hinges groaned. Dust fell from the beams above me. Something pressed close against the other side. When dawn came, I finally looked. The chair was no longer in the clearing. It wasn't at the edge of the woods. It was there leaning against my door. No space left between us. No distance at all. Just the chair, waiting. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I had only one night left before it found its way inside. Nights in the cabin were always quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against your chest, wood groaning softly, wind threading through the cracks. I kept 2 lanterns burning, one on the table, one by the bed. Their glow made the shadows softer, easier to ignore. That evening, the forest felt restless, branches shifting though no storm had passed. The air inside hummed with a low unease. I stayed close to the fire. Then, the lanterns changed. At first, a faint flutter. The light swayed, dimmed, and then both flickered at once. Not random, not like a flame struggling for oil, but timed, in perfect rhythm, on, off, on, off. My breath stalled. I leaned closer to the glass. The wicks were steady, but something unseen was playing with the light. The room fell dark. Only embers glowed faintly in the hearth. The silence deepened, as if the cabin itself was listening. I didn't move for a long time. But then, through the window, I saw it. A glow far out in the trees. Pale, unnatural, beating like a pulse. Slow, measured. I should have turned away, closed the curtains, sat back down. But my eyes stayed on it. Each pulse felt like it reached me, through the glass, through the air. Into my chest, it grew brighter. Not a flame, not a lantern, something else. The glow seemed to shift just beyond the trunks, moving deeper, waiting, calling. I thought of leaving the room, burying myself beneath the blankets. But I knew it would still burn out there. I would still feel it, so I stood by the window, every breath shallow, watching the rhythm of that glow, like it was watching me back. Minutes stretched thin. The forest pulsed. The cabin swayed with it, and my thoughts felt no longer my own. I blinked, and for a moment, I thought I saw shapes in the light, figures, motionless. But when the glow dimmed, the trees were empty, just pines, endless and dark. Still, I couldn't look away. The silence pressed harder. The lanterns flared again, both at once. The sudden light harsh against my eyes. But it wasn't comfort, because now, the pale glow outside was closer, no longer deep in the woods, but hovering at the clearing's edge. It pulsed, once, twice, and the cabin seemed to answer. The lanterns flickered in sync, as if connected, as if the thing outside controlled every flame and every shadow. I felt the air grow colder. Each breath left me in clouds. The floorboards chilled beneath my bare feet. Something was moving nearer. The glow swelled until I couldn't see the shapes of the trees, just the light itself. It painted the window, bleeding into the room, and for a moment, I thought I heard a heartbeat, not mine, deeper, slower. It filled the silence. Between pulses, the lanterns went dark again. The cabin was black, except for the pale glow seeping in from the glass. And I realized it wasn't just light, it was an invitation, calling me to step outside, to leave the warmth of the fire and walk into the trees. I held the door latch in my hand, cold metal biting my palm. For a moment, I almost turned it, almost answered, but something inside me resisted. Something whispered not to go, that whatever waited in that glow would not let me return. I stepped back, closed the curtains tight, but even with the fabric drawn, the pale glow pressed through. Faint, unrelenting, I sat in silence until dawn, never moving, never sleeping, and the light never fading. Even now, when the lanterns burn steady again, I feel it waiting at the edge of the woods, pulsing softly, as if it remembers me. The valley was always quiet at night, a stillness that carried across the pines. Only the wind, and the long, low cry of the horn. It came every night, always the same hour, a sound that rolled through the dark like a wave. At first I thought it was distant, a farmer's signal, or some forgotten tradition, but no one in the nearest town admitted to it. They told me the valley was empty, no herds, no watchmen, no need for horns. Still, every night it came. The sound rose low, hung heavy in the air, and drifted away. I grew used to it, almost comforted by the pattern. It told me the hour, It told me I wasn't alone, but tonight, something changed. The hour came. I sat waiting for it, and when it sounded, it wasn't outside. It was inside the cabin. The floor trembled under my feet. The walls shivered. The horn's cry was not distant. It pressed through the wood, through my chest, deeper than any sound should travel. I froze. Every thought emptied. Only that vibration remained. Low, endless. The windows rattled. Dust shook from the beams. The lantern flame bent sideways, quivering. I felt it inside my bones. Then silence. The kind that follows thunder. Thick, expectant, waiting. I stood still, afraid to breathe. But the floor hummed again. A second call. Louder, this one didn't fade. It swelled, filling every inch of space, until it was hard to tell if I was standing or sinking. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound was inside me, behind my ribs, pushing against my heart. The walls stretched, or maybe it was my eyes. The corners of the cabin leaned away. The ceiling groaned as if it might lift. I whispered to myself, anything, just to hear my own voice. But the horn swallowed it, made it vanish. I stumbled to the door. My hand shook on the latch. But when I opened it, the night was still. No sound in the valley. The trees didn't move. The stars were steady. The world was calm, but the horn kept echoing. Inside, through the floorboards, through the beams, through me, as if the cabin itself had become the horn. I shut the door and backed away. My steps were clumsy. The sound deepened with each one, like it knew where I was. I pressed myself against the wall, and the vibration was stronger there, like something vast pressed its mouth to the wood. Breathing the sound into me, my vision blurred. The edges of the room darkened, and the horn stretched into a steady drone. An unbroken call, not a warning, not a signal, but a command. I sank to the floor. The boards quaked beneath me. It felt like they might split open. Let something rise through. Then, all at once, the sound stopped. The cabin fell into silence. Too sudden, too clean. I waited. Minutes crawled, but no echo came. Only my own shallow breath. I thought it was over. I thought I'd imagined it. But when I looked at the table, the lantern glass was still trembling, and in the silence I knew the call was still here. Not in the valley anymore, but waiting in the walls. The snow had fallen heavy that week. Each night the drifts pressed higher against the cabin walls. The world outside was pale, muffled, endless. I stood at the window. The pines leaned heavy under their burden. The sky glowed faintly with winter light. That's when I saw her. At the tree line, barefoot, her gown trailed across the snow. Thin fabric, clinging to light for the cold. Her long hair hung stiff, frozen into strands that caught the moon. She didn't move. Not at all. Just stood at the edge of the woods. My breath misted against the glass. I blinked, and she was closer, not by much, but enough that I knew I hadn't imagined it. The snow behind her was untouched. I held my eyes wide, fighting the sting, fighting the instinct to blink. The silence thickened. Then I blinked, and she was closer again. Her face still lost in the shadows. The gown dragged in the snow, but there were no footprints. The ground behind her was smooth. I stepped back from the window. My heart felt slow, heavy, the air in the room colder than before. I turned away, only for a moment. When I looked back, she was at the clearing's edge, her hair lifted slightly, though there was no wind, the strands stiff, snapping like brittle reeds. Her arms hung at her sides. I couldn't see her eyes, but I felt them, fixed. Patient, I reached for the lantern. The flame trembled when I touched the glass. It gave no warmth. I blinked again, and she was nearer. Now at the first pine, I whispered to myself, just to hear my own voice. The sound fell flat. Lost in the heavy snow-muted air, her gown trailed farther now, longer than it had a moment before, stretching, dragging, twisting through itself. I tried to turn away, but my body resisted. Drawn back to the window, back to her, another blink. Closer still, her face pale now, though blurred. I thought I saw her mouth move, not opening, just a tremor, as though frozen lips cracked against the cold. My eyes burned. I fought the blink, but the sting was too sharp. Darkness for half a second. When I opened them, she stood at the porch, bare feet against the boards. No sound, no prints. Her head tilted slowly, like ice breaking from a branch. Her hair shifted, brittle against her shoulders. Her gown brushed the door. I stepped back. The room seemed to shrink. The lantern dimmed, as if pulled from inside. I blinked, and she was gone. The porch was empty. The snow untouched. Only the faint glow of the sky remained. But the cold stayed, settled into the wood. Into my chest, I moved to the door, hand trembling on the latch. I didn't open it. I couldn't. The silence pressed deeper. A silence that wasn't natural. Not the hush of winter, something else. I looked once more through the window. The tree line waited, pale and endless, empty and still. Every time I close my eyes, I feel her, not gone, just waiting for the blink. The attic smelled of dust and wood rot. Cold drifted through the beams. The boards groaned under my weight. I had never climbed this high before. The narrow ladder swayed behind me. The lantern in my hand flickered low. Shadows pressed into the corners. Old trunks leaned against the walls. Cobwebs stretched across rafters like grey lace, and there, half buried beneath a folded quilt, was the journal, leather, cracked with age. Its surface soft, edges curling, the strap still buckled shut. I lifted it carefully. The weight felt wrong, heavier than paper should. I sat cross-legged on the floor. The lantern light quivered against the pages, and I opened it. The handwriting was uneven, dark strokes, as if carved into the paper. Names, places, dates long gone. But it wasn't the words that unsettled me. It was what they described. Every page mirrored what I had lived. The rocking chair, the road that never ended, the woman in the snow, my breath caught. Each line a memory, each paragraph something I thought was mine alone. The pages turned by themselves. My fingers barely touched them. They landed on an entry written just days before. It described lanterns, flickering, a pale glow pulsing deep in the trees. The hum I had followed, though I never told a soul. I closed the book, pressed it tight against my chest, but the leather was warm, pulsing faintly beneath my hands. I opened it again. The words had shifted. Different now. The journal described me. My steps, my hesitation, the lantern in my grip. The air thickened around me as I redot every creak in the rafters, every shallow breath, even the way my hand trembled on the page. The script changed sharper, faster, more frantic, and still, it described me. I stopped reading. The silence felt alive. The lantern hummed faintly, as if straining. I flipped forward, page after page already filled, the ink still wet in places, and then, the last one, blank, waiting. I stared at it, the paper pale, almost glowing in the dim light. I knew what it wanted. The journal rested heavy in my lap. The attic pressed close, suffocating. I traced the empty page with my fingertip. It felt soft, too soft, like skin beneath paper. The lantern sputtered. Shadows thickened behind me. I thought I heard breathing. Not mine, not above, close. The journal slipped open wider. The spine cracked, eager. The blank page seemed deeper than it should be. I imagined words rising there, not written, but waiting for me. I closed my eyes and saw ink forming anyway, lines etched behind my eyelids. When I opened them, the first letter was there, drawn across the empty sheet. In my own handwriting, my hand ached, fingers stiff, as if I had been writing for hours, but the pen was still tucked inside the strap. I dropped the journal. It landed open, waiting. The blankness shone up at me like water. I tried to step back, but the attic floor shifted. Groaning, leaning, tilting toward that page. It pulled at me. A silent request, a demand. I reached for the lantern, but the flame guttered out. Darkness filled the beams. The journal glowed faintly, alone. I bent toward it, not because I wanted to, but because it wanted me. My breath fell onto the page, and I swear I saw it stain into words, still blank, yet no longer empty, as if what I breathed had been taken, stored. I touched the edge once more. It was warm again, waiting. I left it there, on the attic floor, but I can still feel it, even now, downstairs, in the quiet of the cabin. The weight of it presses in my chest. The blank page, still waiting high up in the ridge. The air was thin, the kind of thin that leaves your breath short, even when you're still. The cabin sat in shadow, a wooden shell at the base of an endless wall of rock dot, and carved into that wall was the hollow, perfectly round, like an eye pressed deep into the mountain's face. I told myself it was erosion, wind, rain, frost over centuries, but no hollow should be that smooth. It stared down into the valley, and no matter where I walked, I felt its gaze following. That night, the fire burned low. The wind hissed through cracks in the wood, and I tried to sleep, but my mind kept circling back to the hollow above me, to the way it seemed alive. When I closed my eyes, I drifted, but the dreams came quickly. I was standing in the valley, looking up at the ridge, the round void above the cabin, except it wasn't empty. Something shifted inside, slow, deliberate, a shape pressing forward. The sound of breath, heavy, wet, patient. I woke to silence, the kind that hurts your ears, where even the crickets stop. And then, above the roof, faint and steady dash breathing, dot deep, dragging like something massive. Crouched low, watching, I couldn't move. Every part of me listened. The cabin walls trembled as if under weight. I thought of the hollow, and I knew whatever it was, it had come down from the stone. The fire popped, and in that sudden spark of light, a shadow crossed the window. Too tall, too slow, not human. I held my breath until my chest ached, and still the breathing went on, circling, pressing against the silence. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under again. But the dreams, they were worse. I stood inside the hollow. The stone was warm, slick with moisture, and deeper in the dark, two pale shapes blinked open, eyes not carved, alive. When I woke, the cabin was grey with dawn, and the ridge above was quiet. The hollow looked empty again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't watching the valley anymore. It was watching me, and even now, when the wind dies down, I still hear the breathing dot, soft, patient, waiting just above the roof, like the mountain has lungs, and I am inside its chest. It had been weeks of unrest, whispers behind doors, knocks on the walls, shadows that moved even when I stayed still. Then, one evening, it stopped. The air grew still. No rustle of branches against the glass, no creak of the floorboards above, only silence. At first, I thought it was a gift, a reprieve from the constant unease. But the longer it lingered, the heavier it became. The silence pressed against my ears, so dense it seemed to hum. Every breath felt too loud, every movement intrusive. I tried to read, but the words blurred. The quiet behind them was too loud. I tried to sleep, but the absence of sound kept me awake. It wasn't peaceful. It was watchful, like something had pulled away all noise, just to see what I would do. I walked the hall at night, bare feet against cold wood, each step swallowed instantly, as if the silence consumed even that. I stopped by the window. The trees outside stood motionless, not a leaf shifting. Even the fog held still. The world had frozen, or I had slipped into something else. Hours passed like this. I don't know how many. Time didn't move right in that silence. It stretched, and then I felt it, not a sound, not a shape, but a presence, thick, low in the room. Pressing close to the floor, I couldn't see it, but my skin knew it was there. Every hair rising, every instinct screaming. I turned slowly. The hallway was empty, but emptiness has weight, and this one breathed. The silence wasn't empty at all. It was filled, so tightly filled that nothing else could exist in it. I backed into my room, closed the door softly, and waited. The silence followed me, seeped through the cracks, sat in the corner of the room. I tried to speak, but the words stuck. Even my voice didn't belong here. And in that strangled stillness, I understood. The whispers had only been warnings. The knocks just echoes of what circled. The shadows its fingertips, brushing close. All of that noise had meant it was moving, hunting, searching. But this silence, this meant it had arrived. It no longer needed to knock, no longer needed to whisper. It was here, in the quiet, breathing against the walls. I sat on the bed, unmoving, listening to nothing, until nothing became unbearable. And even now, the silence hasn't ended. It waits for me to break it, for me to be the first sound. But I don't dare, because I know the moment I do, something else will answer. The cabin sat alone at the tree line. Pale frost clung to the windows. The woods beyond were heavy with fog, and the night stretched far too long. I had barely slept. The silence carried a weight. Every beam of the cabin felt strained, as if the wood remembered something I did not. When the first grey light of dawn touched the glass, I finally let my body rest against the chair, eyes half closed, breath unsteady. That was when I heard it. The latch, slow, careful, turning from the inside. The door creaked open. Timber groaning, cold air sliding in, curling against my feet. I froze. The air was sharp, bitter. But beneath it was something worse. Breathing, not mine. Slow, drawn out. A weight to each exhale. The sound hovered just inside the doorway. Close, too close. My chest tightened. I hadn't touched the door, and I knew no one else should have been here. The pale light of morning spilled through the gap. Dust hung in it, trembling, as if something unseen had brushed through. I didn't move. Every instinct told me stillness was the only safety. The breathing shifted, deeper, as if whatever stood there had taken a step forward. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, the draft through the frame, but no wind carried rhythm. No wind lingered like a body. The floor beneath me creaked, but I hadn't moved. The sound had weight, a soft footstep on old wood. The door continued to inch wider, so slow it was unbearable. Every moment stretched thin, like the world was holding its breath with me. The fog outside thickened. It poured through the opening, curling round the frame, slipping across the floorboards, and still the steady, deliberate breathing. It came from the dark just beyond the threshold, where the fog was deepest, where eyes could hide. I thought of running, of shutting the door, but my limbs felt locked, pinned by the weight of dread. The fire in the stove had burned to embers. The cabin was dim. Every shadow deepened as the pale dawn spread wider. Something shifted in the doorway, a presence not seen, but felt, like the air had grown heavier in one place, like the silence bent around it. My heartbeat pounded against the quiet, too loud, too fast, and I knew it was listening to me. The latch hung loose. The wood groaned again, and with a slow, dragging sound, the door opened to its widest. The fog surged in. It filled the room, soft against my skin, cold against my breath. But the worst part was that the breathing came with it. It was inside now. I backed away, step by step. The boards moaned under my weight, each sound swallowed by the dense air dot, and though I couldn't see it, I felt it standing between me and the door, blocking the only way out. The shadows of the room seemed to bend toward it. The walls leaned inward. The silence stretched until it trembled. I wanted to scream, but the thought alone was dangerous. A sound would draw it closer. I pressed my back to the far wall, and I waited, my breath shallow. Every second stretched thin. The fog thickened until the room dissolved. I couldn't see the chair, couldn't see the fire, couldn't even see the frame of the open door, only pale white, and the faint pulse of something vast moving within it. And still that steady breathing, always closer, always listening. The cold dug deep into my chest. It hurt to breathe. It hurt to stay awake, and yet I didn't dare close my eyes, because I knew if I did, I would feel it breathing beside me. And when the door opened at dawn, I realized I had never been the only one here.